to Hanna Worldwide and Friends, the podcast about living abroad. Thank you so much for listening again and for making it to this episode. Please feel free to share it with your family and friends if you like it. And you never know who might need to hear this today to feel inspired or to feel like they can make the move. Please welcome with me Cayathri Divakalala from Sri Lanka. Kaya is an activist researcher with more than 20 years of experience in the social justice realm, working on many different topics. Facing many challenges in her life as a queer person of color, she has been dedicated to bring social changes. In 2021, she co-founded Adhikar Aotearoa, a charitable trust working with LGBT plus communities of color. You can follow her work on Instagram under Adhikar Aotearoa, which I will highlight in the description of this episode. Hi, Kaya.
Hello, Hanna. Guten Tag. Kia morena, everyone. Hanna's listeners.
Yes.
Thank you for that lovely introduction.
Thank you for being here, Kaya.
Oh, thank you for having me. And also thank you to your previous guests on this podcast for kind of having shaped this space already. And I listened to a few and it sounds really interesting.
Thank you. I'm sure without any of the guests and interviewees, I could not do it. So I'm also very grateful to have all of you, especially you today as my special guest.
Thank you.
So what has been the reason for you to leave your home country, Sri Lanka?
Okay, so I think this is the 6th time I'm doing it. So if I kind of say, relate that question to this recent time when I moved to Aotearoa, New Zealand, it was my PhD. So a few years ago, I applied and got a position at the University of Waikato to do my PhD in sociology.
Yeah.
And that's what brought me to Aotearoa.
Nice. And me knowing you already, I know that you have been not just to New Zealand, you have been traveling and you have been even living in different countries already. Would you mind telling us a little bit about your experience in different countries as well? So what was the first time you went overseas and what country was it?
Sure. So I think it was in 2001 when I first left Sri Lanka to do my first degree, undergrad degree in India. So that was in Delhi, India. Yeah. So, and most of my other travels had been either based on my education, higher degrees or research work that I did outside of Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
So I have lived in, sorry, this might sound like a brag, but bear with me. So I've lived in, other than Sri Lanka, India, the US, the Netherlands, Australia, and now Aotearoa, I think in that order.
Wow. And was the reason mainly studying and education?
Mainly education. But also, so these are the countries that I have lived in as well, at least for a short, a few years. But I've also traveled
the world.
On work and on so I've been as you mentioned in my the lovely introduction you gave me. So I've been an activist researcher for the past 20 plus years. So that has kind of taken me to places as well.
Yeah. And that's super interesting. So was that already the start when you studied in India? This was your background studying as well?
Yes. So Sri Lanka is not an easy country to live in. Yeah. We have had ethnic war for 30 plus years, and like everyday life can be or can get harder and like, difficult on a kind of regular basis.
Yeah.
So I've always kind of done work in Sri Lanka for a X period of time or X number of years, and then when that work kind of drains me, or like drains my energy, and when I feel like, okay, it's time to kind of step out for a bit and do something else, and then come back, then that's kind of the time, or those were the times that I used also, used to build my career academically. So I guess luck and also the hard work that I had put in always kind of helped me find programs and people and countries to be part of and live in and learn, and then go back to Sri Lanka and apply my learnings, or share my learnings with communities there.
That's really awesome that you do these things. So thank you a lot. Like, there are a lot of people out there who are helping, but also a lot of people who are unaware. So it's great to have an opportunity to have that light on people with charities and things like that a little bit more, and especially because there's still like this massive gap of talking about the LGBT plus community. So it's really great to see that you're one of the people who is looking into that more, especially also because you have experienced a lot of challenges because of the person you are. Do you mind telling us a little bit about that experience?
Sure. So just to add, with my name, so Cayathri, and among friends and colleagues, I go as Kaya. And I use she, her pronouns, which I should have mentioned at the beginning. Pardon me. So in India, and I was in my early 20s then, the shock was more as like how to navigate life as a single woman in Delhi. I guess it's still one of the unsafe cities of the world, I would say. But at that time, it was like really bad in terms of safety and security. As a single person, I would say, but also a woman. And I was people often thought that I was either from South India, because I have the color of my skin is dark and darker than North Indians, because North Indians are mostly fairer shades. So the discrimination was kind of felt, or they kind of saw me as someone from the South India, or some part of South India, or some of them at that time also thought Sri Lanka was still part of South India, so they didn't even know that Sri Lanka is a country on its own or an independent country. So it was not easy to, again, navigate life on a daily basis as someone who with a certain skin color and as a woman walking to my college, where I did my degree every day from home and back, and there was no sense of security at all. So those things teach you a lot of lessons. You learn a lot. I was lucky to have to share a house with a friend who also had traveled around the same time with me from Sri Lanka to Delhi to do her degree. So we kind of connected, and we shared the same house. We didn't change for 3 years, lived in the same house. So that helped to have someone that you can kind of count on. And interestingly, she has been living in Christchurch. For many years now. So,
you kind of always find your way back to the same people.
Maybe. So, those experiences, I'm not saying like everything was hard and difficult, of course. The hardships and challenges were there, but I grew a lot living in Delhi for 3 years, and that was my very first time outside of Sri Lanka. like managing everything by myself.
Yeah.
Like managing finances and living with a very, as a student, you don't have much money.
Yeah.
So you really have to count, okay, I have 10 rupees for lunch today. I better, buy something. Yeah, that only cost me 10 rupees, Indian rupees. So learning all that, but still also having fun and making friends and making a sense of community, connecting with people.
Yeah.
I'm someone, I guess I'm both. I think there's a word I'm forgetting now, but I'm also I'm introvert as well as an extrovert.
Yeah.
So I do need people and a sense of community to belong to, or if not belong to, feel connected to.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I also enjoy my personal a me time, and I need that to kind of recharge my batteries. Yeah. So with living by myself in Delhi. And making friends and connecting with people and finding common ground. So I think although I became an activist, that was kind of, that wasn't even a choice. So when I lived in Sri Lanka in the northern part, so I was born, so little after I was born, the ethnic war started.
Yeah.
So I grew up in time of war, and so helping one another, helping community and immediate community and extended community was just part of my life, and I would imagine it was part of many people's lives there at that time, because we had to help one another to stay alive and stay share the food that we've got, or clothes that we managed to have, and so on. So I started doing that since my teenage years, but I learned more about activism and kind of understand, empathizing with people's struggles and trying to do something for them that made sense for them and with them in India.
Yeah.
So, for example, just to give a couple, a friend of mine and I volunteered with the riot survivors in Gujarat. I think it was in 2001 or 2002.
Yeah.
So that was a learning experience. And there were many as such, group of us worked on female feticide, so these are issues that are particularly relevant to the Indian context.
Yeah.
And violence against women. And like I said, as a woman of certain, looking, those women were targeted more on, either on buses, transportation, or even if you walk, or despite the mode of transportation, women were targeted. And particular women were targeted more than others.
Yeah.
And trans people, for example, targeted more than even women. So so I kind of had this huge awareness of how, the different sections of society.
Yeah, what's going on around you.
Yeah, and how deeply their lives are impacted by even a silly joke. It's a joke, but still it can have impact, have really drastic effect on people. Yeah.
Especially now, since the world opens up a little bit more, which I'm really happy about as well to see. Unfortunately, not in every country and not in the extent we would like to see it. But even in countries where they are more open, that it really is a little comment at school from children who don't think about it, or teenager who just want to make a stupid joke. And it's not just in the LGBT plus community, but it leads to suicide so often. And I just remember recently seeing an article from the UK, I think, and there are just so many places where people make jokes, people don't take them serious, or saying something which they are not even realizing that it's actually an insult, or make them feel really insecure and hating themselves. So it's great to have more awareness so that we all can learn from it, and we can be like more accepting for everyone, so that because there's space for everyone in this world, right? So very happy to have someone who is looking after those people. And you mentioned you growing up in a country with war, you have seen it all around you, and you kind of naturally gravitated towards helping other people and wanting to fight for the right thing. But also you were really interested in doing your research on it and even doing your degrees in it and studying around it, which is the next step as well, right? Like if someone grows up in an area of war, it doesn't necessarily make them become an activist. So it's still that you had that interest and that you felt like, okay, I need to do something about it. I can't just sit around and watch this injustice happening. So yeah, very nice.
Yeah.
Very proud.
Thank you. Thank you. But yeah, I guess for me, it comes from a personal space.
Yeah.
Like, everything starts from you, right? Like, from us within. So based on my own experiences, then I find community, other people who also share similar experiences might have been discriminated or marginalized due to their different identities, such as gender or sex or sexuality, ethnicity, race. But at the same time, of course, there are so many other, discriminatory aspects that, I myself don't experience or haven't experienced, but it's still out there. Like, for example, I am a cisgendered person. So that's drastically, my experiences are different from those who are trans or, those who are not cisgendered. And I am an able-bodied person. So I navigate this world or wherever I live without much difficulties to get around. We don't even think about how it would be for someone who is not able-bodied, who cannot just get up and move. So there are so many other things that we still don't see or hear much, or there's so much work to be done. So I also want to put that out there. I guess I try to do a bare minimum that I could.
I know what you mean, but it's still more than other people sometimes do. So I just want to kind of cherish that part as well.
Thank you.
And I know for myself, I could do way more. It's always good to be more aware and try to be just helpful, be compassionate and loving. And even if not everyone is going to join a charity or is volunteering or is doing all of these things, but there are a lot of little things how we can make the world a better place, right?
Very true. Every little bit counts.
And would you think while you were growing up in Sri Lanka, you always had that idea of going away from your own country? Or did it just grow over time, or just with the idea of studying and now having that age where you go out and learn, then it became more obvious for you to wanting to leave your country?
Interesting question. So when I lived in Jaffna, Sri Lanka, that's in the north of the country, that's where I spent, I think I was 15 or 16 when we displaced from there due to war. We couldn't live there anymore, so we slowly started our family, and along with hundreds of thousands of people, we started displacing towards south of the country. Towards the south. So, up until then, although we, it was a war situation on a daily basis, but I never thought I wanted to leave. Because, we didn't have electricity. We didn't have, proper luxury meals, or the basic needs, human needs were very minimal. But still we had our life there. My consciousness grew there. My sense of community was born there. And I must admit that, so those of the listeners who know the context of Sri Lanka and South Asia to some extent would understand when I say a sense of nationalistic pride was kind of heavily, like, put on us, or we were taught in that way.
Yeah.
To some extent, brainwashed too.
Yeah.
So I had that pride. I thought, as a proud Tamil person from that region, I should just live there and for the rest of my life and help the community, or grow in that community and do the best I could. And there was a strong sense of patriotism there, which I'm very thankful that changed. Otherwise, I wouldn't have grown. That would have been so limiting, and I'm sure my worldviews or experience-based learning wouldn't have grown at all.
Yeah.
I would have been a very small town, person with limited mentality, perhaps. So, anyway, I don't want to go to that side. But so I'm glad it changed. So with our kind of movement, in terms of at that time, we just wanted to find a safe place to live in.
Yeah.
And I must also say, so my family, in the context of Sri Lanka, definitely had certain privileges to be able to, move from one place to another and find safe shelters and, resources to keep us alive. So I'm thankful to those. And of course, those privileges mostly came from my parents' background, or that what they had done for us, and how they have navigated lives for us, for themselves too. So since we started moving, and since the time I started meeting more people, not just Tamils, not just people from a particular nationality, nation or nationality. My curiosity grew. And that's when I knew that, that a place or a country or a particular community is never going to hold me back. So I've been, I'm quite comfortable, moving to a new country, new place. Yes, it's, I don't want to romanticize the narrative. Yes, it's hard and challenging and all that. But I guess I find meaning in that, and maybe, it kind of, it's exciting and every time you move. It's an adventure, and I learn a lot from people, cultures.
I totally
places,
understand.
Land, nature. Everything.
You see it also as a way of development, of finding out who you are and what makes you, pretty much. Hey,
you are 100% right, because I learned quite a lot about me by relating to others. So those relationships and relationality helps me to understand me and where I am and ground myself, and also about other people. So yes, it's a very enriching kind of full circle kind of experience.
And when would you think did your I don't want to say awareness, because I think the awareness was there before, but when did it start for you that you felt like you want to be more an activist or a helping hand for the LGBT movement and community? Because you must have felt at one point like getting to know yourself more must have played a role in that process. But when did it happen that you thought, okay, this is now where I want to focus my knowledge, my actions? Where do I want to focus my actions on? And that then became the LGBT plus community.
Thank you for that question. It makes me reflect more. Okay, so when I was a teenager, little after the puberty time, I started writing love letters to my girlfriends. But I also knew that was not the so-called normal thing to do.
Yeah.
Because girls of my age at that time were highly fascinated by boys around them, us, and heterosexual relationships were the only thing that I saw.
Yeah.
So there was no sense of same-sex relationships or I didn't even know that I could have.
Yeah.
But it kind of happened. That's who I was. It was not sexual. Of course, I was a minor, but those fondness and feelings and whatever that happens to your body when around puberty time and coming of age time. I remember it was very much, my attraction was more towards girls. But then that had to change because towards as I grew and also moved from one place to the other, everything I saw around me was again heterosexual relationships. So I thought I had to
adjust.
a boy or a man. But I wasn't against it either. So so I learned it. But when I moved to India, Delhi, to do my so as I mentioned that earlier. That's where I could see people. I guess little before that. Sorry, my memory could be might not be correct with this or with this timeline, but I think So a little before that, so in the late 90s, I got the introduction to, I started to meet people in Sri Lanka, mostly Colombo, Sri Lanka, who had same-sex partners.
Yeah.
So that was a mess. My head went, oh, okay. So it could be a thing, or it is a thing.
Yeah.
And later I moved, I lived in Delhi where I saw more such relationships and and lots of diversity in terms of sex, gender, and sexuality and related identities and expressions and so on. So I knew, so by then I had the awareness and also I could relate to it, from a personal experience. However, by then I had a male partner, I think. Yes. So it was also confusing. I knew I was queer and I was very much part of queer spaces and thinking and doing things. But it was also hugely a learning experience for me. So I took my time to come to terms with, in a way, what my preferences and choices, desires and choices were.
Yeah.
So I took my sweet time. And after a few years, I think I started identifying as queer. And the more I interacted in queer spaces, I learned a lot about, even within the queer community, there could be vastly different experiences of how we see the world and how we see our lives and how we want to live our lives. And so that happened. And but sadly, so these are India, Sri Lanka, even here. These are also countries that were colonized by the British, right? So, and Sri Lanka was colonized by three. The British was the last colonizers. So it was same-sex relationships were criminalized under the colonial law and legislation. So as it is in many indigenous cultures and countries, it was not criminalized before that.
Yeah.
So we had to fight to decriminalize it because this is, to begin with, these are not laws that represent us. However, they are the ones that we follow, unfortunately. So in India, lot of activism around that time happened to also decriminalize same-sex relationship.
Yeah.
And as we speak now, activists in Sri Lanka are trying to, so there's a hope. Activists have been trying to, decriminalize it for a very long time now. But, with such work, it takes time and it gets momentum and then it gets dropped. It gets momentum and then it gets dropped because it's at the end of the day, it has to be passed in the at the parliament, and all the parliamentarians will have to approve, and the process. So this time around, there's hope again. So it was, I don't know, the people who have seen it in the news would know, there's hope to get this bill passed to decriminalize same-sex relationships.
Yeah.
So let's hope that happens.
Fingers crossed.
Sorry, maybe I have digressed from your question. But so my activism around queerness and LGBT plus communities kind of started in that context where I first, I identified as one, but that took a lot of time, few years before I started identifying myself as one, and slowly I explored, what needs to be done to make a difference in the lives of queer people. And in Sri Lanka, of course, the work is still ongoing, as I mentioned. But so when I moved to Aotearoa, one of the first people I met was Vinod Bal, with whom, a good friend of mine, with whom I co-founded Adhikara Aotearoa in 2021 to work with ethnic LGBT plus communities in Aotearoa.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you for that.
No problem.
And so you would also agree on traveling around, seeing different relationships has helped you to understand what you want, who you are, identify yourself, and then feel like you want to be part of that positive movement to support and to change the social aspect of especially LGBT plus communities.
Yes, 100%.
And to come back to the fact that you have been living in a lot of countries already, especially all over the world, so the US as well and Europe, would you say that you took a life lesson out of every single country? Was there one bit you would say you took away from the Netherlands when you were living there, and then the US?
Interesting. I could start with the US experience. So that was the experience where I knew that I do not want to ever go back there or live there ever in my life.
Yeah.
I say that because, so I was in the US around the time the war on terror started. So it was a little after 9/11. That's when pretty much the entire world changed. Homeland security started in the US. So security, the idea or concept of security has drastically changed. First in the US, of course, but the rest of the world followed. So as a person of color, traveling, flying, navigating different airports, reaching my destination was not easy. That's the understatement, I guess. It was nowhere close to being anything to do with ease. So I was in the US at that time, and seeing how quickly communities change. Your local communities immediately became very unsafe to live in, and neighbors became suspicious of one another. I had people who were either following or non-following people with Islam names. So the whole anti or Islamophobic sentiments and attitudes were really driving me nuts. And and the war on terror started. So that's when the US, I think, significantly started the war on terror, of course, and everything to do with Osama bin Laden, and so I was in the US when all of this was getting shaped, and it was very much in the news, and public discourse was dominated by this. And me as, again, a person of color, and as someone who has lived or grew up with war and violence, and I know what violence does, and what kind of destruction it causes. And I did not want to be part of that, or I didn't want, that experience was pretty intense.
Yeah. To say the least.
Yes. So I knew that I do not want to go back to that country ever again. And I did not. And my experience in Europe was mostly pleasant. I guess I had also, as a person, I had grown, because it was a different period of time, right? So there was growth in how I see myself as well as the world, and how I related with people. So that was good. I also met made lots of friends, and I lived shared a house with two other friends from two different countries. Mm-hmm. But it was a fantastic experience of living freely, as people who have lived in the Netherlands now, be able to go to a coffee shop just around every corner without having to worry about the legalities of things and matters that you consumed, was a treat. And I remember a friend of mine, she's from Taiwan. And so we were all part of the same program in our cohort. So I did my master's there. And in our cohort, we had, I think, 160 students. I mean, don't quote me for numbers, but around there, but from 60 different nationalities, countries, from all parts of the world. Yeah. So she and I remember the first time in Den Haag, we went for a walk because at that time we shared the dorm, hostel facilities. We went for a walk and we wanted to have coffee, and then we saw a coffee shop and we walked in thinking that we were going to have coffee, and then we were asked for our IDs, and I was like, oh, this is a weird country,
Coffee is high.
And you need
caffeine.
Sorry. You need identification for this, and then this is again my Sri Lankan brain, right? Because in Sri Lanka I would even now, I would, on a daily basis, I'll carry my identity card, because no one gets, as a, minority in numbers in that country, I would be, interrogated or, stopped at checkpoints or by the police or, the military, just asking for my identification. So I wouldn't step out of the house without an ID. So that was me, that's how, I grew up. So I was like, okay, this is... Or even here, what's going on? And later we learned, what kind of a coffee shop that was. So then that was one of my highlights. So and also I traveled with friends and also by myself in Europe, and I had a good time traveling and experiencing again, different cultures, people, learning from one another. Politically, it wasn't as intense as my experience in the US. Yeah. So maybe that was a good part. That made a difference.
It must have helped.
Yes, it certainly helped. And do you also want me to speak about living in other... Sorry, I kind of digressed.
Sure, if you want. We had US, we have Netherlands. Pretty much what lesson you kind of took away, or what you would say you've learned from the different places you have been in?
Yeah. So in Europe, it was, as I mentioned already, I was part of a academic institute where there were students from pretty much all over. So I learned quite a bit from personal experiences, of friends and people I randomly met and had random conversations on the streets, or on tours and organized tours. And it doesn't have to be friends always, right? You meet people just at the grocery shop, or when you go shopping, or when you go on tours, or when you kind of go to a pub or you meet people, like, those pub talk. Oh, yeah, I think I really enjoyed my pub talks in Europe. Like, random people, like, you would never meet them again, or less chances of meeting them ever again. But you would have an evening of fantastic conversation.
Yeah.
Like, sharing life experiences. And so that, I grew a lot in
that sense.
In those interactions.
Nice. I didn't go often to pubs, especially when I travel around and I'm with friends. Sometimes I remember when I went to Ireland and the people were just exceptional. I really loved it. And we went to a pub and there was this really old lady. She must have been like end of 70 or maybe early 80s. And she was buying us a drink and she was talking to us and she was just so lovely.
Yep.
And I still remember it. And it's been probably 8 years or so. Maybe not quite, but that was my highlight as well. Having this really nice lady and having a really awesome conversation. My English wasn't great. It was good enough to have good conversations. But this I will always remember. And I also remember that I got her phone number. But of course, I don't even know the name anymore, unfortunately. I will probably not meet her again, but it's still a memory which I really cherish.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. That's how things are, right? Like, especially when you travel.
Yeah.
When you are in a new country or like a new place.
Yeah.
In the same country. Yeah, you meet random people and random conversations, and I quite enjoy them.
Yeah. Which is why we are here today.
Well, you're not a stranger or this.
Yeah, well, we will see each other again, I hope.
Oh, yes, of course. I thought we were friends.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Awesome. And was it right after you went to Australia or was there another country in between?
You mean
from Europe?
So from Europe, I went back to Sri Lanka, worked there for a few years as my pattern. And apparently.
And in this time, when you went back to Sri Lanka, after you already have been to different places, you have grown a lot as a person and you have seen so much different cultures, different people. Your horizon has been broadened immensely, I guess. How did you feel going back home and knowing that most people back home are probably still more the same than you are now? They have, of course, developed in their own way, but haven't had the exposure you had, not the chances you had with getting to know different people, different cultures. How did you feel being back at home?
Yeah, I'll try to do justice to that question, but let me try. So when I go back, or when at that time when I went back, when we say home, even in Sri Lanka, I was living in one place, but my work was geographically focused on different part of the country. So, for example, at that time, I think I was living in Colombo, and I believe, so that was also when the ethnic war in Sri Lanka ended. So that was in 2009.
Yeah.
So there was a mass displacement of people happened, people who just managed to escape the last phases of the war and managed to get to safer side of the country. So I started volunteering with a local organization there.
Yeah.
Then I worked with them. So I was living in Colombo, which is in the south of the country, but my work was focused in the north.
Yeah.
So I would spend we worked around the clock. That was one of the intense time of my life. Around the clock, because so I worked in humanitarian aid sector, where we had to provide shelter, food, clothing, medical supplies, etc. Meet the needs of the people who had just escaped
Yeah.
the worst nightmare of their lives, barely made it alive. And lots of them were with, like, all kinds of adversities, like, physical wounds and injuries, but as well as psychology, trauma and psychosocial issues and struggles. And it was a massive humanitarian effort by many agencies and international and national agencies involved. So I was only just a little part of that. So when you ask, how did I find, or was it difficult to get back, or how, the situation was this. So it was pretty much an emergency situation. And I felt the urge to go back and be there. So it was, I remember during the last year of my time in Europe, it was already becoming harder for me because I was listening. Of course, I had family, friends, colleagues, the people I had worked with before, communities back in Sri Lanka. I knew this was happening. The last phases of the war had started and it was getting really bad. People were dying in hundreds, if not thousands, on a daily basis. I just wanted to go back. So I still managed to finish my degree. I didn't even stay for my graduation, I think. For the ceremony.
Wow.
I went back and immediately started. I didn't want to relocate myself in the north at that time. So I found a place. I think my family, my sister and my parents were living in Colombo at that time. So I found a place there and kind of to be the stronghold, or where I kind of worked from. Not physically, but a place in Colombo so that I can come back to, where I felt safe or safer. But I spent somewhere between 20 to 25 days in the north, and then I'll just come back 5 days a month to Colombo, to that house, to just recuperate and then go back again. People, I would also add there, just because people, not everyone gets to leave their countries or countries of origins or countries of birth. Doesn't mean that they don't grow, or travel definitely helps to grow, but it's not the only way of learning, right? So those who haven't done a lot of traveling, but they still learn, and there are other ways of learning. So I don't think I've had issues of, so every time I went back to Sri Lanka, I never had problems of reconnecting or connecting, making new connections. Because you always meet people that you can have a conversation with, and who would get you, or there'll be shared values, beliefs and principles. And I also, for me, that's where my queerness comes as well, the progressive politics or whatever that I think that govern, or I like to live by. The values that are so dear to my being. I try not to compromise on those, because I don't think if I compromise on those, life will make any sense to me. So on that note, I have always managed to find people that I can relate with and connect to.
And I think it's very interesting to say, because you didn't go back just to visit and have a holiday or just visit your family. You went back in a state of emergency. And of course, priorities change as well. And you already have that mindset of wanting to help no matter where you are in the world. And when it comes to your own family, your own country, your people, going back home, there's probably not even that thought. And have the people developed? Have they opened up? Do they have an open mind? That's not even coming up, right? It's more like, okay, where can I help? How can I make a difference? How can I be part of a positive thing? And I understand that. So for me, coming from a safe country without war, these are questions I ask myself. How did I feel when I went back? Does it feel like my hometown, which is a really small town, has grown in a way? Are the people open-minded? Are they not? But going back to a country with war and with issues and with like fundamental problems for safety and for the minimum of food and shelter and a home and all of that, puts things back into perspective, right? And it's just, there's no priority in, have you grown any way in your mind at the moment? Or, I mean, as you said, people have grown, but that just is not the point.
And different ways, I think.
Exactly. So very, very beautiful how you said it as well.
Oh, thank you, Hanna. And also, just to quickly add on the concept of home, or the idea of home, is like, I never feel like Sri Lanka is my home country, because remember I said something about the patriotism or nationalistic thinking, right? So in the past, let's say 25 plus years, I have grown, like, or maybe even 25 years maybe, like, I've grown a lot away from it. So I no longer, like, I stopped believing in that perhaps 20 years ago. So home is where I am, and, like, you know, where I feel comfortable and safe to be able to call that place home. So when people say home, it doesn't have to be Sri Lanka for me.
It's also a really nice definition of home for what you say.
So I very much feel home in Aotearoa. Like, again, it doesn't have to be Kirikiriroa, although we are speaking from here now, but or living here now. But
And before we jump to our final 3 questions, do you mind telling us a little bit about your charity so that people who are interested can look into it and maybe even connect with you?
Sure. So Adhikar Aotearoa is a charitable trust to work with LGBT plus communities of color, particularly those from a South Asian heritage or South Asian backgrounds who live in Aotearoa now. We do have an international alliance building desire or component too, but right now we are still new, and we are still trying to kind of be focused in Aotearoa first, and then slowly expand connections outside of Aotearoa. But of course we have friends and people who are already doing queer activism elsewhere, around the world. So building those connections will not be difficult. But at the same time we want to be focused here and do some work for the community here first. So like I mentioned earlier, my friend Vinod Bal and I co-founded. He's a lawyer. He works in we met in Kirikiriroa, but he moved to Wellington a little over a year ago. So Adhikar doesn't have an office space as such. And Adhikar in many of the South Asian languages mean rights, or the right of people. So that's why we named the charity Adhikar. And right now we have 5. So it was initially Vinod and I, and then we got 3 more people along the way, who are trustees now. They also live in different parts of Aotearoa, and their professions are different. But we all are queer, and we all are from a South Asian background. But different generations, different. Fifth. So we know there's a 5th generation Kiwi, and so immigration, the legal status of all of us in this country are different. So we work. So the 3 pillars or main themes that Adhikar is driven by are support, education, and advocacy. So everything related to the lives of or struggles of LGBT plus ethnic communities is what shape these 3 components. So for listeners, if you like to go check us out on our website, and we also have social media handles. I have never been a social media person, so I'm not on there, but I know we know then Kiran is the other trustee who is the one, he's the one who handles the social media mainly. he does a fantastic job at it. So you would be able to find more information on like what we are doing and why we are doing. Our website is pretty informative. And recently we published a report that was received very well by lots of state, non-state organizations. In the country, in Aotearoa as well as outside of Aotearoa. So in that report focused on the experiences of 44 LGBT plus people belonging to South Asian heritages and cultures. And it's everything about their struggles, their experiences of navigating their lives in Aotearoa as a person of color, queer person, and also the resilience, right? Like the powerful stories of resistance and the desires to see changes.
Yeah.
That helps not only them but people like them.
Yeah.
So that's what Adhikar does, and we are slowly but surely we are trying to diversify the mainstream LGBT plus community, which is mostly Pakeha, right? So we are trying to diversify and bring the experiences and narratives of people of color. I don't want to say to the center because I don't believe in the center versus periphery narrative or binary, but we are trying to bring focus to these experiences and lives and to bring better services to them and make their lives a little better.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I will definitely highlight the pages for Instagram and the webpage also in the description. So if anyone wants to see, they can just check out the description of this episode.
Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you for those of you who decide to do that.
So we always finish off our episode with a quick 3 questions.
Sure.
That means the answer will be 1 word or 1 sentence.
Sure, I'll try.
You are not getting any penalty for having more words, but just so that it's 1 quick, intuitive answer.
Mm-hmm.
So, number 1, if you would leave New Zealand, which country would you want to live in next?
I don't think I have a country.
Yeah. So the world is open for you and you are just going with the flow.
And the preference would be to go somewhere that I have not been yet.
Nice.
Been to yet, yeah.
Yeah, that's the first time we have this answer.
Okay.
All right. Number 2. What do you miss the most about Sri Lanka?
Food?
Yeah, I can imagine. That's very different here.
Yeah, I have some favorites of Sri Lankan food that I can't cook myself. So, yeah. And there are no Sri Lankan restaurants in Kirikiriroa.
Fair enough.
So I'll have to either go to Auckland or Christchurch.
Yeah. So for everyone who's listening, who is interested in having a business, there is demand.
Or maybe we can start a business together. I love to cook, so I'm happy to.
I am definitely not the best cook, and or I'm a lazy cook. Let me put it this way: I can definitely cook, but I would say if you want someone who is able to do a great meal, especially with a nice original recipe, I think I would be a little disappointing. But thank you. Thanks for the trust.
Yeah. No problem.
And the last question, number 3. What do you like the most about New Zealand?
The most? I think it's the landscape and nature.
Yeah.
I find like gardens and parks and waterfalls and beaches and everything to do with nature is quite peaceful here.
Yeah.
Maybe also because of the fact that there aren't many people.
That's probably one big factor.
Yeah, and especially if you travel in the South Island,
even less.
Even fewer people and less pollution. So I like the peace and quiet and the fact that humans haven't polluted
Everything.
the environment as much as it is damaged in certain other parts of the world.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that I like that
Thanks.
the most about New Zealand.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So, thank you so much for having the time today to talk to me and to share your story and to share what's really close to your heart. And hopefully the listener enjoyed it as well. And yeah, thank you so much, Kaya.
Well, thank you, Hanna. And Kiora, thank you for everyone who has been listening.
Yeah.
And have, come this far, right?
Made it to the next episode.
Yeah. So thank you. It was a nice conversation.
Yeah, I liked it too. Thanks.
Yes, ka kite.
So everyone, have a lovely day or night wherever you are, whenever you listen to it. And thank you again for listening. And bye-bye.